Hello, everyone. This is Ben Schmidt from PolySwarm here. I'm the Chief Security Officer here, if you don't know me, and also one of the co-founders. Today, I'm going to be doing an AMA, answering questions, number one, about our 2.0 release, but also to give everyone sort of an idea of the state of the product and what everything is, how everything is progressing, and what people can look forward to over the next few months. In that vein, I wanted to start off with one of the questions. We have a ton of them today, so this could go on for a while. I've got 28 listed down, and hopefully whatever you guys post during the AMA, Carlos and Blake will be feeding me that during this AMA, so definitely if you have any questions that come up during it, let me know. But the question I wanted to start with was whether or not I can give a summary of what has been done and the problems we faced since the last AMA, and what are the next steps to overcome all of these problems that we're addressing. So first off, we have made extraordinary progress over the last few months. We've added a bunch of new features that our enterprise POCs have been asking for to make it more useful in their environments. So URL scanning, metadata searching, so being able to search over all of our archives, of which we already have tens of millions. We also have added a number of features for hunting, so allowing people to search over this data set. So on the one hand, it's very, very useful to allow people to scan, but people also want to be able to go back through and look at these scan results and find other things that are of interest to them to better help protect their networks. So we have been working very, very hard on that. On the other hand, we've also been addressing a lot of the scaling concerns that I know many of you have heard me talk about. I went into some depth about the last AMA, and we are actually very confident that we've solved most of those problems, and we are actually in the implementation phase of going forward with that right now. So as far as the next steps go, we did some load testing over the last few weeks to see how much the network could handle, where we ran into issues, and I have to say that the tests were almost overwhelmingly positive. We ran into a few bugs that are actually being tested right now in our staging environment, and will hopefully be deployed over the next couple of weeks. So the next steps for us is getting all of these fixes deployed and moving forward to actually test all of those again. So during our testing, we were hitting somewhere around 80,000 bounties a day before certain components of our systems were failing under load. We have identified what's actually causing that. We're pretty confident now that actually scaling those up to hundreds of thousands of bounties should be entirely reasonable. We're going to be doing that testing over the next few days, and hopefully I'll be able to give you more updates on how that goes soon. So right now, what we're really focused on is making sure that that scaling works, making sure that our systems work perfectly under load, under all sorts of conditions, and making sure that Nectar inside of the system is safe at all points. So a lot of work has gone into that. I know it's kind of hard to see some of this back-end work going on, but it has greatly helped that we've spent the time doing this, and is going to make it much, much better to for all the future consumers on the platform. So I know big question on all of your minds is when we're actually going to do mainnet. Right now, because of all that load testing and all those fixes that we need to test, we are targeting somewhere between a month and a half to 2 months before mainnet will actually happen. This allows us to migrate all those changes into production, have all our enterprise POCs test out the system, make sure it's functioning up to their standards, make sure we can handle the tens to hundreds of thousands of samples that they want to put through our platform. And once we do that, we can transition over to real Nectar. All our engines will start getting paid, and you will actually be able to see people being rewarded or penalized for their performance in the network. So we're very excited about doing that. I'll probably more than most. So it's really a high priority for us to get that done, and I'm pretty confident we are in the position to get that done in a month and a half to 2 months. All right. Will there be opportunities to add new features that enterprises want once the marketplace is launched? If so, will this be a seamless upgrade, which won't bring down the marketplace? So we've spent a lot of time thinking about upgradability of both our contracts and all the tooling that we have around the marketplace. And right now we actually have started using a pretty robust system for doing this that we actually tested out last week. So last week we did a production deploy to upgrade both our Geth nodes, some of our contracts, and all of PolySwarm D and PolySwarm client. Now what that means is pretty much everything would actually go down. However, whenever we did this deploy, we only had a downtime of a few minutes because of this new strategy that we're using for doing upgrades, where we're actually having 2 live communities that can transparently be switched between to do these updates. So we can actually add new features and even do contract updates without actually taking down the network as it is. The network continues functioning, and everything works. I'm sure you've noticed over the past few months, we've occasionally had significant periods of downtime, and that was essentially due to us doing all these sorts of updates, but not having places for the bounties to go whenever we're doing these core infrastructure upgrades. Now that is no longer a problem, and we're pretty confident we're going to be able to keep the downtime to a minimum moving forward. So we've been getting tons in addition to that, we've also been getting a ton of requests from all these POCs that we're doing for various features that they want. And most of those actually don't require any downtime whatsoever. So we've just been adding those without actually taking down any of the network temporarily or anything like that. Once we start allowing other participants into the marketplace as well, these contracts and these systems will continue functioning just fine normally. The main issue with that right now is we're the only person running these things because of how quickly we're iterating. Once everything has stabilized, we're going to start inviting some of our partners into the network as well to increase the availability of the network. So the next question, are there any ongoing talks with exchanges to list PolySwarm? So I can't talk, as I'm sure you're all tired of hearing, too much about the exchanges. I can say that we've had very positive discussions with a number of exchanges and that we're continuing to pursue it. I would very much like to continue giving you guys updates about that, but unfortunately a lot of NDAs come into play and I can't really talk about it until things get signed. Is PolySwarm sufficiently funded, and could you tell us for how long and how PolySwarm plans to acquire additional funds if needed? So right now, PolySwarm is doing fine on funds. We are definitely, always open to talking to interesting strategic partners. We're open to taking additional funding in various ways, but we're not necessarily planning on doing anything like an ICO anytime soon. But right now the financial situation of PolySwarm is quite good, and we're pretty happy with the way things are going. Can you explain what the fluctuations in bounties mean? So I mentioned earlier that we were doing some load testing on some of the items in on some of the components in the PolySwarm system. The best way to do that is for us to actually submit bounties. So we've discussed this with our engine providers, and they're happy to let us submit because they get to test how their engines are performing under load and do appropriate scaling as well on their backends. So what we have been doing is periodically sort of opening up the floodgates. So we have a number of partners that are are actually very kindly sharing samples with us so that we can build up our initial database for enterprises to look through, but also so that we can scan all these files through the system and engines can actually already get started on voting and testing their platform. It also allows us to sort of jumpstart the marketplace so that we get, initial traffic flowing through that is interesting to engines that they can then go back and analyze and do interesting things with. So those fluctuations that you're seeing are largely the result of our testing. Now, you may have noticed over the past week or so, there were that bounties dropped very, very low. And that was not because bounties were not going through the system. We were doing some upgrades on an Elasticsearch cluster, and that is where those bounties were being tracked. We've been continuing to have the same sort of baseline load that we've had for months now, but scaling up into the 80 to 100,000 sample range when we're testing whether or not various engines can handle the load or our core infrastructure can handle it. So when will you see more engines on the portal? So I don't know when this question was submitted, but we actually last week during our deploy added a bunch of new engines, and we're currently wrapping 4 or 5 more during this next week. So hopefully those will slowly be getting deployed as we've got them tested and integrated into production environments. We are working hard on getting all of these people who have agreed to wrap their engines into the platform to actually get them in. For some of these organizations, they're a lot larger organizations, so things move more slowly than sometimes you want. But we're also, stretching our dev resources pretty heavily to make sure that everything, once it's integrated, works well. So that's some of the delay in getting all of these engines into production. But if you go into the portal right now, there's about 20 different engines. Some of them may or may not respond based on what you submit, but it's definitely growing, and it's growing quickly. We're pretty excited about all the partners we're bringing online. So next question. 28 is too many. Do you expect NCT to be volatile? And if so, do you expect adoption of PolySwarm and NCT to be deterred by it? So right now, we are in the very early days still. So right now, the volume on the marketplace is not particularly high because participants in the marketplace aren't purchasing Nectar to use it in the marketplace currently. We expect that once that volume increases, the fluctuation in this marketplace is going to reduce drastically, number one. And number two, the marketplace actually dynamically adjusts the payments being made to these participants based on the price of Nectar. So they could still expect a certain average reward coming out of the network, and we don't really expect it to impact people's desires to participate in the marketplace as it is. Since the microengines are submitting Nectar with every assertion, I'd imagine they want an average certain cost per scan assertion. Yes, so as I just sort of alluded to, there is some amount of money that each scan is going to cost. Right now, we're targeting between a cent to 2.5 cents, depending on the type of scan that is being performed. So what what that means is that some analyses are cheaper. So microengines on the network do all sorts of analyses. Some of them are just looking up hashes in a database, all the way to running this thing, running this executable, seeing what it does, and trying to determine whether or not it's malicious based on its activity on the system. So hash lookups in general are quite cheap. Doing those executions costs compute time, and it costs it has a bunch of extra induced costs that makes it not worth it for these participants to actually do these analyses unless they're getting compensated more. So the engines themselves actually get to determine how much they're going to get paid based on what bounty they're going to respond to. If someone on the network wants a sample analyzed more intensely, they attach more money to it. What we're doing as an ambassador on the network is making it easy for customers to basically specify how intensive of a scan they want. And we on the back end sort of handle, based on historical data, figuring out how much money to attach to each one of these bounties so that it actually gets analyzed. To finish off this question, will this be decided by the market in real time? And yes, as a marketplace, you post something on eBay, people decide whether, based on supply and demand, how much they're going to pay for a particular item. The same sort of thing applies here. The marketplace basically dynamically adjusts based on how much it costs for them to provide and how much in demand their service is. So yes, obviously that will be represented in Nectar, but we handle sort of making sure that that value is appropriately on the back end ourselves. And any good ambassador is going to do a similar thing. So since the microengines are submitting Nectar, oh, sorry, I just answered that one. Do you guys think adoption of PolySwarm and NCT could be deterred by a volatile NCT asset? Or do you think the incentives for operators and owners of a membership token outweighed the volatility? And what do you think those incentives are? So this is a pretty, it expands upon the previous NCT volatility question, but sort of expands upon it. The answer is it's complex and it's different for all different participants in the marketplace. So on the one hand, you've got arbiters, and to maintain their arbitrship rank, they have to stake a certain amount of money for a certain period of time. So they actually lock up NCT and store it there. That is their cost of doing business in the marketplace. So in addition to that, you've also got the marketplace dynamically transitioning fees so that people are actually getting rewarded what they're actually willing to work for. So each one of these engines gets to decide based on whatever the market rate of NCT is, whether it's worth their time. And as far as ambassadors are concerned, they're working with trying to reward these participants as well in some way that will potentially attract them. So we don't expect that NCT volatility, number one, will deter people. But number two, as the network grows, we expect the volatility to drop significantly. So will the amounts of stake Nectar change over time for each participant depending on price? General consensus. So as far as stake Nectar goes, the only participants in the marketplace that are staking Nectar for long periods of time are the arbiters. Now, the arbiters, that amount that they need to stake definitely will change over time. It is essentially decided by the majority, so the largest stakers of Nectar. Right now, we're essentially hand-picking the arbiters, but as we add in this arbiter staking feature, it becomes a dynamic thing. So the arbiters can actually stake more Nectar to become arbiters on the network. What that means is that these arbiters are actually buying into the platform and doing it so that they can reap the rewards of being an arbiter, which is being trusted by the network to perform these validation actions and actually making money for it. So it's valuable enough for them to stake their Nectar on this network and to stake more Nectar to maintain their arbitrship. So once the platform is up and running and there's a proof of concept PolySwarm can point to, will there be an effort to actively pursue partnerships with governments and large enterprises such as Microsoft, Amazon, mid-cap corps, etc.? So we are already pursuing those kinds of partnerships. There's no reason to wait for the for mainnet to go live, which I assume this question is asking. Right Right now, we already have a proof of concept to sort of point to. It doesn't have the strong economic features yet because we haven't introduced actual money to the platform, but people can actually see it working, and that's been hugely valuable to us. If you go back through all of our announcements over the past few months, we've got tons of big names that we've been talking about. Last AMA, I talked about Dell and Telefonica. We've added a few more since then that I unfortunately can't quite announce yet, but hopefully we'll have news coming out on that in the next month or so. But we're already getting a lot of buy-in, and it will make it easier once we go to mainnet to convince people, because then we can show the actual economic pressures having an effect in the marketplace. So as an NCT token holder, how do I participate the whole transferring process passively, like staking and many other hot chains? So this is actually a fascinating question, and one that we've talked about some internally, and I'm personally a very big fan of. But the sort of idea is that even if you are not an expert in the network, you can actually sort of front nectar to various participants in the marketplace that you think are performing better than others. So essentially giving them some amount of nectar that they can then go off and vote and assert on all these malicious entities, make money, and the person that actually staked in that nectar gets some percentage of the value back. This is not something that we are immediately going to do in the short term, but I would really like to see it, because it sort of increases the amount of nectar liquid for the engines to actually do all this voting, and it also gives opens up the marketplace to a wider sort of voting, where you may not be able to analyze malware yourself, but you could see who's doing a good job and who's doing a bad job and allocate funds accordingly. So that's something that's actually a fascinating thing to think about, and we're considering it strongly internally. So thank you for the great question, whoever asked that. All right. What are some of the main objectives of larger corporations, such as Alibaba, for running microengines? What do the larger players expect to gain? Additional revenue, testing their products, better understanding the threat landscape. So all of the above. I would say that the larger ones aren't generally particularly concerned with a ton of extra revenue, although it's certainly an improvement over what, say, VirusTotal gives them, where they essentially don't get anything other than a filtered sample stream in most cases. They definitely want to test their products, and actually a large number of the ones that are already wrapped in are interested in going head to head. They like the competitive aspect of the marketplace because they can then go in and actually prove that their product is finding stuff before their competitors do. So in the industry, there are a number of companies that do what's known as AV testing. So they have some corpus of malware that they then scan against all these products and basically come out and say, oh, these guys were the best and these guys were the worst. There's a lot of angst about that in the community. A lot of people feel that it's not a particularly honest industry. There's definitely a lot of malicious players in that particular group of companies who essentially are looking for pay to play. You pay them a large amount of money to include you in their testing, and hopefully, you get a good score. This actually gives them a place to already compete without paying anyone. Anyone can wrap it in, and they can actually prove that they're better than other people. But finally, they also are very interested in the sample stream. So, seeing all these interesting samples coming through, and also seeing what all these various smaller engines are saying about things that they don't necessarily have insight into through things like VirusTotal. So how quickly do microengines and companies using the service expect to convert between NCT and USD. Would they purchase NCT as they need it and liquidate as they receive, or held for a period of time, purchased in batches to use, held for a certain amount? And so basically, how long are microengines and companies holding this nectar? For some of the companies, this could be a very long time. The answer is it depends. Some of the smaller players are probably more interested in redeeming that nectar sort of monthly so that they continue making passive income. Some of the larger players are significantly less interested in doing that. And as I mentioned earlier, the arbiters actually have incentives to not liquidate their nectar and continue adding to their holdings that they're staking so that they can maintain their arbitership. So the next question is, will PolySwarm be censorship resistant? Yes, PolySwarm will be censorship resistant. We are very strongly against censorship here, and we will continue to oppose it at every turn. Will the AV companies have any influence over the development of PolySwarm, or do PolySwarm have their own development goals? The answer to both of those is yes. So number one, PolySwarm is a marketplace, but it's also a community. What we're hoping to build is an open platform that people can participate in, whoever they are, and share information about threats that people are facing and improve the knowledge of the community as a whole. Because it's a community, we definitely want larger AV companies to have a say in this marketplace. Additionally, though, we also want smaller companies to have a play. Now, right now, we've sort of taken the role as caretakers of this community. So we're, sort of balancing all the different needs of all the different participants and trying to strike a good balance between all their different goals. And I think we've been doing a very good job of that. If for some reason, suddenly we become bad caretakers of them, All right, well, hopefully I'm back now. I'm sorry about that. Connection dropped there for a second. So to reiterate this question, I don't know how much got lost, but Vitalik suggested that Ethereum may use Bitcoin Cash as a temporary scaling layer to transfer data. Will this in any way impact the future of PolySwarm on the Ethereum blockchain if this compromises the security of the platform? So I honestly have not heard this proposal before. I am doubtful that it would impact us in any serious way. As you know, most of our computation right now is being done on the side chains that we refer to as communities. So even if the main Ethereum network is putting its data out onto other chains that are not necessarily as secure, it doesn't necessarily impact us directly. So we're not particularly concerned about it, but as things develop in the Ethereum ecosystem, we're constantly watching, and we'll make sure that it's more or less my job to make sure that it's not going to negatively impact the security of the platform. So how does pricing compare to virus total? Could we have some numbers? Otherwise, a percentage more or less expensive than VT. So unfortunately, I can't give you exact numbers, and in fact, our pricing does vary depending on the usage of the client. But in the vast majority of cases, using our platform is significantly cheaper than virus total and has significantly better results. So we're talking in the 20 to 40% less than VT range right now. So we are constantly trying to make the service better and cheaper for everyone using it, and we think we've put together a pretty compelling platform for most of the use cases that our clients have. So where is the data of past scans being stored, and where are the computations being done? So the answer to this is the internet, more or less. So we obviously do a large amount of computation on our own to provide some of the extra services on top of the network itself. But the actual scanning takes place in engines that oftentimes are running in AWS. They might be running in some random server in Russia. They could be running anywhere. As long as they can talk to the marketplace, you can actually do the scanning there. And that's one of the big differentiators between us and something like virus total, is that anyone can run it in their environment, do their analysis however they want to do it. The only requirement is that their results are accurate. So in addition, we keep a lot of data of the past scans, but the actual assertions that all these engines are making are being stored on the blockchain forever. So as we have addressed a lot of the scaling issues that we were initially having with Geth, and if anyone's interested later, ask me and I can go into more technical detail on what those were. But now that we've addressed a lot of those issues, we could start inviting other partners in, and that data can be replicated across more than just our various regions in our own AWS accounts. And suddenly we can have a large network of other AV companies actually participate in the marketplace and actually be running these nodes themselves, which is what we want. So have any of the microengines who are existing AV companies expressed concern about their reputation on detecting artifacts being publicly available? So I wouldn't say that none of them have expressed this. I believe there have been a couple that were a little concerned that their integrations weren't fully baked yet, and that they weren't that they might be responding incorrectly at various times. But by and large, most of the people that we talk to are extremely positive about this. They want to be able to show off their strengths. So they want to be able to go onto PolySwarm and show a historical scan, the historical results for scans on a particular artifact, and say, I was the first person to detect this as malicious. That's a very powerful thing for these companies to be able to say, and they're pretty excited to now have a very public platform for that to actually happen. So a portion of the subscription fee is going to obtaining NCT to pay microengines arbiters for their services. What is the breakdown of the remaining services that are being paid for via subscriptions? And what would be the approximate split as a percentage subscription that goes to NCT and other services? So in general, we sort of split those up. So the actual amount of money that people are paying for scans on the PolySwarm network, almost the entirety of that is going to paying the providers. So anytime anyone pays us to do a scan for them, that money is more or less going directly into this marketplace. The reasoning behind that is that we want more people to submit files, so we're willing to do it at a pretty reasonable costing. the services that we're providing on top of that, analyzing that data and collecting that data, are priced basically, based on how much it costs us to develop and maintain, and the computation required to do it. So, for instance, historical scanning, which is one of our hunting features, which allows you to go back through every sample that we've seen on the PolySwarm network and search for particular files that match particular patterns. As you might imagine, because of the scale of samples that we have, that is very computationally expensive. So we charge a lot of money for that because it costs us a lot of money to do it. But to more or less answer your question, when people pay us for a scan, the vast majority of that money goes to, minus a small percentage for processing and doing exchanging of NCT, et cetera, goes to the actual people providing the actual services on the marketplace. And if the percentage that we're taking is too high, other ambassadors are welcome to come in and participate and compete with us on price. That's the vision, and because of that, we're not. We want to reward everyone that's participating in the marketplace fairly, and if we aren't doing that, someone else will. So, last AMA, I mentioned that 20 POCs are currently testing the product. How many POCs are still running out of that 20? How many have become clients so far? So right now, what these POCs are doing for our platform is providing testing and giving us feedback on the features that they need to work in their environment so that they can replace VirusTotal with us. And doing load testing with us. So finding all these different issues and fixing them before the actual network goes live. So what we want to do is schedule these POCs to start completing once once mainnet actually happens and they can see the returns of all of these engines competing with one another rather than just being another scanner. So right now, a couple of those POCs have dropped out and want to talk to us again once mainnet goes live. But the vast majority of them are still testing us out and reporting bugs to us. And once we solve all those issues, we're pretty confident that a lot of them are going to convert. So are there new employees on the team that you can introduce? And the answer to that is resoundingly yes. So we've been hiring a lot of great devs. So I'll just go through some of our most recent hires. One is Javier. He is the most recent on our team, and he comes from a malware analyst background, and he's helping us design the tools in such a way that it will be very, very useful for enterprises and actually provide a bunch of features that platforms like VT don't actually provide to their users. So we're trying to make sure that all this analysis that we're doing is not only different, but it's far easier to use, and it's even cheaper for companies to use. So it makes for a pretty compelling product, and Javier is taking the lead on doing that. Another guy we've hired is Samuel. And Sam has been working on largely on making sure that our platform can scale. So it takes a lot of work to make a scalable platform that can go into the hundreds of thousands to millions of samples a day range. So what Samuel is doing is making sure that each individual component of our platform is ready to handle that kind of scale. And he's been doing a fantastic job at this. And this is one of the things that we've been deploying over the last few months, and I'm pretty sure you've noticed a lot of his changes because it's definitely making things more stable. And finally, we have Marcio, yet another dev, and he's been doing a great job getting all of this data ordered. So he's doing a lot of the data analytics for us and setting up systems that can analyze these hundreds of thousands to millions of samples at scale every day live. So he was the chief guy behind getting the metadata searching out, and it's been really, really useful. To anyone listening to this who has done malware analysis before, even with the metadata we're already extracting, you can do some pretty interesting searches, and we're hopefully going to have a blog post about that later this week, actually. So all these tools that we've been developing are, large part due to those guys and the hard work they're putting in. The rest of our dev team is still working hard. Aaron and Rob are killing it as usual. So we've got a really good team put together, and we're really excited about the next couple months. So, all right, engines are going to be rewarded by NCT, but will that be in accordance to some dollar value or just via flat number of NCT tokens? As NCT value will fluctuate, how will you assure the stakeholders that irrespective of NCT volatility, they will get their fiat for their findings? So I already answered this earlier on, but basically the marketplace dynamically adjusts to the price of Nectar. Depending on what the price is, the engines will respond or not based on whether or not it's worth it to them for the compute time. So there's some calculations that go into that, but we've done a lot of work trying to help out engine providers with how to determine that. And we've done a lot of work on the ambassador side as well on how to determine that. So how will PolySwarm, the company, be affected by the fluctuation of NCT? So like I said, we need to keep it in mind to make sure that the marketplace continues functioning healthily. And as we've always said, the success of the marketplace is critical to the success of the company. And so dealing with any potential fluctuations in NCT is something important to us, and we're cognizant of it. But like I said earlier, as the volume grows, we're pretty confident that the volatility is going to drop pretty dramatically. So if Ethereum operated on a stable currency, would you guys have chosen to operate on that currency instead of minting a new currency? I don't believe we would have. So the NCT token gives us a lot of ability to sort of control our particular type of money in our smart contracts. So it makes it a lot easier for us to do all these sort of complex marketplace games that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do with just a straight currency. So PolySwarm, since day one, has told the world that you are competing against VirusTotal. You have explained why you are better and what more you can do for your customers. Is PolySwarm not worried that a company like VirusTotal could mimic PolySwarm services, create a better ecosystem value for their money if PolySwarm starts stealing market share? You must have pushed a few buttons by now, and VirusTotal has the funds and the backing to make a move like that. We don't think that it is very likely that will ever happen. Number one, VirusTotal is pretty happy with their business model, I think. And number two, even if they see us stealing market share, it's very unlikely that the participant, so the core of the marketplace are the participants, right? The people on the engine side and the people on the consumption side. So making those people happy is our number one goal. And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, VirusTotal has taken a pretty monopolistic view of their place in the ecosystem. It is unlikely that someone would go through the effort of switching to our platform only to be drawn back to Google. There's plenty of evidence as well in the history of marketplaces and social networking sites where once an ecosystem gets established and reaches that critical mass, it becomes highly unlikely that someone else is going to take it away from them. I don't know if you guys have used Google Plus lately, but I certainly haven't. So there's always the risk that someone is going to create a better, cheaper marketplace than than you're otherwise offering. But right now, I think we are far and away the best place for people who want to join an open, competitive threat detection marketplace. All right, I think I finally got through the questions you guys sent ahead of time. So I'm looking forward to answering some of the live questions. Which company engine is QP? So that's actually an interesting one. So one of our initial engine providers, the engineer who was working on that, I don't remember exactly which one, unfortunately, but one of the engineers was actually interested himself. He had his own little tool that he wanted to wrap into the marketplace and try it out. He hasn't had time, unfortunately, to update it for new PolySwarm client changes. So right now it isn't responding on prod, but it's the exact sort of person that we're trying to attract to this marketplace. So the individual engineers at various companies who have their own cool tool that they've written and they think is great, and they want to just analyze stuff. So we've actually been getting an increasing number of people like that, and we're continuing to try and attract people like that by giving them, grants to actually go and integrate their engines into our network. So what does PolySwarm's malware database look like currently compared to some of the more established AV companies? Just a ballpark figure. So to be clear, we are new. So our malware database is probably comparable to some of the smaller AV companies at this point. We're in the range of the high tens of millions of samples that can be searched over. We're adding about 200 to 250,000 samples a day. I've been working pretty strongly on actually increasing that figure as well. So we are ingesting a ton of data to the point where it's become a pretty useful analysis platform. So all the metadata searching that we're doing that allows you to search over these millions of files in seconds, as well as the hunting infrastructure that lets you go through our entire data set in relatively short periods of time, has all the infrastructure there is in place. And right now, what we're focused on doing is getting these large companies buy-in so that we can actually increase those samples up into the high hundreds of thousands or millions a day that we're ingesting. So Gad asks, are Bounties nominated in USD or Nectar? Do you plan to integrate easy fiat on-ramp instant exchange for companies? The answer to that is yes. So we're already making it as easy as possible for companies to use our platform. In fact, right now, companies pay us simply in a subscription fee that we handle completely on our own, getting fiat into the system in the form of converting that to Nectar and actually using it to submit bounties. So we abstract that all away from them so they don't have to. But we also, for the companies that actually want to directly use Nectar, want to make an easy on-ramp and an easy off-ramp for the engines as well. That is still under development right now, and sort of goes back to the exchange question I answered earlier, but hopefully in the future, I'll be able to give you more details on that. So I saw a tweet about SOC Prime yesterday. What's that about? Can you tell us more? I can't talk too much about it, but some of, I believe Paul and Steve have met with the guys behind that company before. Great guys. They're doing interesting stuff as well. We're sort of in this threat bounty ecosystem together. They're approaching it from a slightly different way. So we view ourselves as sort of complementary and not competitive. We're interested in actually rewarding individual security experts around the world. So that's about all I can say about that. All right. What's the price of the enterprise premium subscription? So like I said, that actually depends on the usage of the enterprise customer. So We've got a number of different levels, and unfortunately, I can't go into too many details on exactly that. It is significantly cheaper, however, than VirusTotal is right now. What parts of the PolySwarm marketplace is stored on the blockchain? Transactions are obvious. Malware database, if malware database is stored on a public blockchain, how do you make sure that nefarious characters don't somehow take advantage of that information? So I can go into this a little bit. So what is actually stored on the blockchain is a URI that points to a malware sample, so that all the engines know where to find it. So a URL. And in this case, that's actually an IPFS URI. So this points to a decentralized file system called IPFS. And that's where the actual samples are stored. To maintain an open network, we cannot restrict access to those public files. All the engines, wherever they might be, need to be able to pull them down. So right now, that information is out there. However, there's a large source of malicious files that exist out on the internet that people can find, and I would argue that it's not extraordinarily helpful to attackers to have access to those samples, and much more useful for all the good guys around the world to have access to it. As far as what else is stored on the actual blockchain, all the assertions that the engines put back. So there is a record of every single engine, what they said about a given file at a given point in time that they cannot change later. And there's how confident they were, the amount of nectar that they were staking on all these things. In addition, the arbiters' votes on whether or not things were malicious are also recorded, so that people can go back later and determine whether or not the arbiters are actually doing a good job. When can we expect a roadmap update? We do not see what PolySwarm is working on, partly because of an outdated roadmap. I can work on trying to get an updated roadmap out there, and to give people more of an idea of what we're working on. Unfortunately, a lot of the stuff that's going on is back-end stuff that might not be necessarily obvious to the people watching the UI, other than that things are now faster and things are now no longer are going down, things are working correctly. So it's one of those things that it's sort of the old adage, IT is best when nobody notices anything. But I can look into getting sort of an updated list based on our internal ticket tracking on what our goals are and what our what exact features we're working on the hardest. Right now, it's mainly polishing up the features that we just added: URL scanning, hunting, metadata searching, and making sure that those are great. And of course, working on making sure that everything is stable and ready for the mainnet release. So I will look into getting that roadmap updated, though. I agree, you guys should know what we are working on. I think I've gotten through all the live questions. So it's really been great. We really appreciate your guys' continued support. If you guys have any more questions, I may be on Telegram for a short period of time after this, so I can try and answer some of them. And I'd also like to thank all of my minions out there, Carlos, Blake, Anna, you guys have been, and Daniela, you guys have all been super helpful in setting up this AMA, and I really appreciate it. Thank you again, guys, for all your support, and hopefully I can do another one of these soon. So thanks.